Good morning and welcome to another Digital Wildlife Walk with myself, Russell Headley, and plenty of guests this morning. It's the 13th of February 2021, and we're talking about garden birdsong. So I'm going to dive right into the presentation now and start talking about the birdsong in our garden. So this is a great time of year to do this talk at, because of course, let me share the screen there. There we go. So you should see me in one of the corners of the screen in its presentation. This is the time of year when a lot of birds have tentatively started to do a territory call. Now, my birds in the garden last week started singing. I think I had about 4 or 5 species started to sing properly again. But since we've had this cold spell sweep across us, that has stopped. Because the birds just won't go for it if the weather is very cold. It puts them back into winter mode. So they've stopped for now. So hopefully we should receive a bit of a boost. Sorry about that. Yeah, so these are the kind of things to listen out for. Now, just before we start, I think we all are familiar with Zoom, but just in case, if the quality of my voice or the bird songs is not very good at your end at any point, you can make sure that your video is off. The button is at the bottom left of your screen, and by doing that, it just means your computer is working less. So that means that the quality can go up from what you're receiving from me. For now, you're all muted just so that you can all hear the presentation nice and clearly. But at the end, if you want to unmute to ask a verbal question, you can do at the bottom left. And during the presentation, if you want to ask a question and you don't want to forget it, or you don't want to wait till the end quite, you can always type the question into chat. Now, I can't see chat as I'm presenting, but the first thing I'll do at the end is to open chat and answer any questions that might be inside there. Okay. So let's get started. And I'm going to start on what I think will be quite a common bird for a lot of people to have in their gardens, which is the collared dove. Now, ironically, in my garden, don't see this bird at all. In fact, I see its cousin, which we'll talk about momentarily. But otherwise, this is a very common garden bird. Ironically enough, if you go back in time about 70 odd years ago now, this bird wasn't really common in Britain. In fact, it wasn't even a British bird. It was a European species, and if one of them turned up in the southwest of the country, then it would send a flurry of birders down to Kent or wherever it turned up to see it. But it started to breed down in Kent in the southeast, and after it started, it didn't stop. And it's now in the top 10 most commonly seen garden birds of any species. And that means that its call is very familiar. Now I'm just gonna double check that I did definitely share audio, because I don't want you. The very point of this is to hear the birds, isn't it? Yeah, that's definitely. So you will have definitely heard that. If you didn't, here it is again. It says. I'm going to leave my presentation alone for just a second. It's just stalled a little bit, but let's just see if it works itself out. The collared dove then is a classic pigeon, and even the pigeons can be separated from each other by their calls that they make to one another. The collared dove, right, I'll stop sharing just briefly because it crashed then. So I'm just going to go out and back into it. And then hopefully, oh, I know, sorry. Apologies, everyone. I think I know what's happened. Hang on. It would happen with this one, wouldn't it? There we go. I think I've got it in my system to try and iron out the bugs. Almost a year of doing this, and there are still technical problems. Can't get away from them. Okay, there we go. That's what was going wrong. I was trying to enter the PowerPoint twice. That's better. Okay, let's get back to the dove. So with the collared dove, to recognize the collared dove, it has a 5-note call. And I often say to people that when trying to remember birdsong, most birds actually repeat the same phrase or song over and over again during the breeding season. And if you can remember that phrase, you'll remember the bird. Now, I've always remembered these phrases based on putting words or lyrics to what the bird is singing. So if you are a football supporter, you can recognize the collared dove because it sings Manchester. Oh, no, it doesn't. It sings United, United. So I haven't heard a collared dove for a little while. So the collared dove sings United and supports Manchester United, but its counterpart in the garden is the wood pigeon, which is a very native pigeon, a larger bird with a very big appetite, and a very common one too. The wood pigeon sings a very similar sounding pigeon noise, but rather than having 3 syllables, as with the collared dove, this one has 5. And you can remember that because this one supports Manchester City, Manchester City. Now you could put, I'm getting replies from my garden at the moment, and you maybe too. You can put any words you want to these calls, as long as it's something that you can remember. That's how you slowly build up your knowledge of the sounds. And you can get to a point where you don't need to see any birds to know what breeding territories are in your garden. In my garden in particular, last week when it was a little bit warmer, the song thrush was actually the first bird I heard this year that was starting to do a territory call. The song thrush is, of course, a member of the thrush family, a cousin of the blackbird, and can be recognized if you get a good view of the chest, because all the little spots on its chest, if you look at them, they're actually pointed. They're like little arrowheads, and they're all pointing the same direction, which is up towards the beak, which is, of course, where the song is made. And therefore, you must be looking at a song thrush. And the song thrush is so named because it loves to sing. Now, it does repeat phrases over and over again, but every 3 or 4 repetitions, it will change what it's singing. And this is why it's called the song thrush, because it has many different songs. But again, it normally repeats one song 3 or 4 times and then moves on to another song and repeats that for 3 or 4 times and then moves on again. So I always play that clip in particular because it doesn't exactly do what it says on the tin. It doesn't do a 3 or 4 repetition for every sound, but hopefully within there you heard there were some repeated bits of the song for between 2 and 4 times. And that's what you're listening out for, to know that you're listening to a song thrush. A blackbird doesn't do that. A large member of the same family that you can see in the garden is the mistle thrush. Now, we have these, but they don't tend to come into our garden. They tend to live out in the open, grassier areas of the farm fields. The mistle thrush is a larger bird. And again, if you were to look at it in binoculars, look at the belly and look at the spots on the belly. Rather than all being arrows, like the song thrush here, the mistle thrush's arrows start to become round orbs. They are actually spots. And you can remember that because they look like little berries, maybe like mistletoe berries. And therefore, you're looking at a mistle thrush. In the sounds, I always liken a missel thrush to a bit of a depressed blackbird. So it starts singing in a bit of a minor key, and there are plenty of pauses and gaps as if it gives up because it can't compete with the blackbird, and then it tries again. So hopefully you can hear that little bit of a sadder note of a blackbird in that call. Moving on to some of the smaller birds, one of the most commonly seen is the great tit, the largest of its family, with crucially a black hat. So the black part of the head is what, at a glance, you can use to know that this is a great tit. A blue tit would have a blue hat instead. And the general territory call, or the song in spring of a great tit, is a 2-note repeated call that sounds like it's singing teacher, 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 or it's a squeaky wheelbarrow. So I'll let you decide which one of those it was. And that's fairly straightforward, but it's worth remembering that through studying these birds, we now know that many have different songs for different reasons of communication. Some to say that this is my territory, it's mine, and some to say that there's food over here, come with me, and others to say that there is a predator over there, avoid. And the great tit has at least 60 different calls for different reasons. So as well as remembering the teacher, teacher, all of the songs follow the same style, which is very short, 1 or 2 notes, high-pitched and repetitive, highly repetitive. And if you remember that style, you can also get the great tit. Alongside the great tit is the blue tit, which is obviously smaller. And remembering the hat color, you know that this is a blue tit because of the blue hat. Blue tits tend to giggle in my ears. Anyway, I often hear them and think of them as laughing at you from behind the leaves of the shrubs that they're hiding in. And again, bearing in mind that there are different calls for different communication reasons with the blue tit, but they also follow a similar style, which is short, repetitive, slightly higher pitched than a great tit. And if you're lucky in the garden, you may also get one of these to a feeder, a coal tit, which is a relative of both the great and the blue tit, but is not as colourful and is possibly, I often describe them, and I feel bad to do this, but it's a bit shabbier looking. So if you look at the black mask on the face, the line between the black and white is not a straight line. The blue tit is very smart looking. The lines are clean cut between colours. This bird always looks a little bit ruffled instead. And if in doubt, on the back of the neck, you can just see in this picture, there is a white line down the back of the neck as well. This is, with practice, you can get this call by hearing it, but it's subtly different from the other two in that the general call that coal tits make, rather than a teacher, teacher, which is quite a harsh sounding titch, this is sweetie, sweetie. It's a much sweeter sounding call. That one does take practice, but with a pair of binoculars, if you're ever unsure, one way to learn is to hear a call that you're not familiar with and try and see the bird. Because by seeing the bird making the song, it helps, well, at least it helps me when I was learning to recognize which call was what. In that same group that we call the tits in the garden is the long-tailed tit. It's funny with this one because it's not actually related to the last three birds. We now know that it's closer related to the warblers. It just looks similar to the other tits in the garden. Nice colors on this one with a very long tail. Can quite happily come into the garden, and they often sound, well, I'll play the clip first. So it's a bit like a blue tit. There's a lot of giggles, there's a lot of laughter in the long-tailed tit call, but it's scratchier. It sounds like it's rubbing on a vinyl. Robins in the garden are brilliant to hear because they are beautiful singers, but they do break my golden rule of repetition. They don't really repeat the same song over and over again. They have lots of little bits of song which they churn out at random orders often. So if you hear a song that sounds random and it's not repeating, that can actually help you because it might be a random robin. And further to that, robins sing very quickly. So if it's a quick random song that you're hearing, it's probably a rushed random robin. You may have already heard this song in the garden over winter because both the male robin and the female robins have separate territories in hard winters. It's important for them both to do this because they are mainly insect and worm eaters. They will also take seed, but their main diet is soft-bodied invertebrates. And in cold weather, most of those creatures dig deep down into the soil to escape frosts. So both the male and the female unusually sing a full territory song. Normally it's just the male that does that in the breeding season. And that's so that they can defend your garden as their territory from other robins. This is a brilliant bird. If you've got this in the garden, then you're doing pretty good. A nuthatch is a fantastic bird that is able to run up and down a tree vertically. It's the only bird in the country that can truly run down a tree because the ankle joints have evolved to have maximum flexibility, to hold the whole body basically upside down. Not many birds, in fact, no other birds can truly do that. Some can pretend like they can, but they can't really. Blue tits are a good example of that. Nuthatches, again, have a very wide repertoire of songs, but they all follow a similar theme, which in my ears normally sounds like a type of alarm, a car alarm or a house alarm on repeat. And a very common bird many of us will have in our gardens is the house sparrow. I'm lucky that I have at least a dozen of these birds regularly visiting my garden, despite the fact that they've had one of the highest declines in Britain and across Europe. They've had the second biggest decline of any bird species, only beaten by the starling, with how many we've lost. A lot of that disappearance is probably to do with our houses. It's in the name. This sparrow has nested in human houses for thousands of years. But modern houses, as we build them, don't generally have the nooks and crannies and holes that these sparrows need to build their nests. And that's across a continent that's happened. So that could explain part of the way why they've declined. Lots of birds in the English language have their very own collective nouns. It's a flock of birds or a pride of lions, but when you talk about individual species like sparrow, they have their own word for them. And the sparrows, it's an argument of sparrows, because when you hear them call, it sounds like they're slightly flustered with each other. True fact, that argument of sparrows. Not that there are any false facts here, obviously. Um, a bird to watch out for now is the chiffchaff. Now, this is a bird that normally is a migratory bird that leaves Britain every winter to go to Africa to spend the warmer months there, and why wouldn't you if you could, eating insects. This is an insect eater, and therefore, if it stayed in Britain, it normally struggles to find enough food. Having said that, more and more are starting to stop over. If you watched Winter Watch this year, you'll know what I'm talking about, because especially around sewage plants, where there's a lot of, you guess it, there's a lot of warmth and there's a lot of insects. And some chiffchaffs are choosing to stay there through the winter because there's warmth and food. So you might hear this song as early as late February or March, and it's the chiffchaff. Very fluty, sings its name, which is chiffchaff, but crucially, as you listen to it, the chiffchaff starts to get a bit confused by the end of the song, and it will start by singing chiff-chaff, chiff-chaff, and then get confused and start saying chiff-chaff, chaff, chiff, chiff-chaff, chaff, chiff, chaff, chaff, and it starts going out of order. And that's one of the ways to split it from something like a nuthatch or a great tit as well. Another small brown bird with a long beak is the dunnock. The other name for the dunnock is the house sparrow. No, it's not. It's the hedge sparrow. We've already had the house sparrow. It used to be called the hedge sparrow because it's a small brown bird that lives in the hedge. But it's not related at all to the sparrows. It's actually called an accentor, is the official name for this family of birds. Now, the word accentor it doesn't really roll off the tongue. So when we renamed it, we took the decision to go with the Old English word, which was dunnock. But in reality, both names still get used. Dunnock and hedge sparrow are the same bird. This lovely dark colours with a bit of blue around the head. And again, last week, my local dunnock was singing a full territory song, which is here. I've put this here in the presentation because it's easily confused, I think, with the next bird. The dunnock is a very high-pitched, tinny sounding bird in song. It's not overly melodic or fruity in its notes. It sounds a bit tinny, I would describe it. Now that's important because another bird that again was usually a migratory species is the blackcap. And again, this is a species that has in recent years started to overwinter in the UK, relying on our gardens for food. The blackcap is a type of warbler like the chiffchaff was. And every year, generally speaking, they go to Africa and come back again. But because some are staying later and later, and sometimes all the way through winter, you could hear this song earlier in spring. And it's like the dunnock, except it's much more melodic and verging on blackbird style of singing, very fluty. And just to confuse everything, this is clearly a blackcap. This bird here is also a blackcap. This is the female blackcap. So you have the male with a fully black hat and a grey body otherwise, and the female has an auburn orange hat instead. And she often is a cause for misidentification or confusion in the garden to try and work out what she is, because the name puts a lot of people off from putting her with blackcaps. So yeah, you could see them throughout the year. If you have overwintering flowers, in fact, it has been seen that the blackcaps that stay sometimes even use nectar from exotic flowers in your garden to survive December and January. And considering the conditions we've had, the cold conditions we've had this year, I would spare a thought for them because they're not used to this kind of weather at all. So again, water in the garden is one of the best things to provide them. Finches, let's talk about some finches. These are a family of birds, songbirds, that have these really big beaks for crunching seeds. And goldfinches are probably the obvious one to see in the garden. Their collective noun is a charm of goldfinches, which is lovely, isn't it? And you can remember that because their song sounds a bit like a wind charm tinkling in the breeze. You often hear that as they fly overhead in small or large numbers. A slightly rarer finch is the green finch, which went through a bit of a decline about 10 years ago now due to, ironically, a virus from Europe that spread here and took out a lot of green finches, but they're starting to recover now. The green finch is green with a yellow stripe on its wing, and it has a very nasally call, which sounds like someone has pinched its beak and it's moaning in protest. Another finch, the smallest finch in the country, is the siskin. This is a lovely bird which is not out of the realms of possibility to get in the garden or at your local park. If you especially have a river system where there's a lot of wet-loving trees like alder, for example, siskins love alder trees. And this is the male with lovely canary yellow and a black hat on the top of his head. You'll notice that the siskin is a very bouncy sounding bird in its call. Bounces from note to note very easily. And of course, then there's the most common finch we have in the country, which is the chaffinch. And they number in their millions in Britain. So we're lucky to say that they're not declining and they are stable in population. The chaffinch's call is the same call over and over again. And it's easy to remember because it starts at the top of a high note and then goes down the notes to a low note and then does a little bit of a shuffle around at the bottom. I've always imagined it as if the chaffinch is at the top of the flight of stairs and falls and tumbles down the stairs, down the flight of notes to the bottom, where it dusts itself off to say, I meant to do that. And so that is the chaffinch. And one of the most secretive finches that you can get in the garden is the bullfinch, and one of the most sought after probably as well. I love the bullfinch. This is a male. He's got his name because of his roundness and his bullishness. He's got a very thick neck and beautiful colors of salmon pink and black on the head. You don't normally see these in large flocks. In winter in particular, they tend to stick in around twos, you know, a male and a female, maybe a couple of other juveniles from early in the year. Despite it being so bulky and impressive looking, it doesn't sound that impressive. It basically sings a 1, 2, 3. And that's about it. So keeping a listen out for a 1, 2, 3 will give you a bullfinch. Talking about 1, 2, 3, I'll also talk about the reed bunting here. The habitat of this bunting, which is a different family of birds, is normally reed beds and water systems. However, it can appear in well-established gardens where there's a regular source of food. You can recognize it at a flash because of that tail. You see the black line and the 2 white lines at the side, that's reed bunting. And it sounds like it sings 1, 2, 3 testing. I always think that it's trying to do karaoke with a bulrush as the microphone, and it's singing testing. So hopefully you hear the 1, 2, 3 testing in there. And the last bird for today is the blackbird. It has to be, because the blackbird is one of the best sounds, I think, in the garden in summer. It really does bring the idea of warmer days with its beautifully melodic song, which, like the robin, is random, but it is not rushed. It's slowed down. And to finish off, we've looked at a lot of different birds today, but really there's a lot of magic about birdsong that we're just scratching the surface of, because that song sounds slow, but in fact, it's incredibly fast. It's so fast that only other blackbirds can really pick apart what's going on in the song. And to demonstrate that, I'm just going to take you into this program here, which is a sound wave program. And this is the clip we've just heard. But I'm now going to slow this clip down to the speed of 0.26, a quarter of the speed we were listening to. And now you can really hear what's going on in the blackbird's song. I bet you'll never hear a blackbird in the same way again after hearing that recording, but that is the magic of birdsong. The level of communication in there is something that our ears just can't normally pick up, and so we're still learning lots and lots about them. But that is the end of the Thank you. That's the end of this presentation today, everyone. Thank you for joining me, and hopefully when the weather picks up a little bit next week, you should start hearing your birds singing to herald the season for chicks and nests and eggs. If you've enjoyed this talk today, there is a subscription offer on all my digital wildlife walks. There's 5 of them in February. Subscribers for just £9 a month get to view the live talks. They get sent a link afterwards to view them again. Or if they can't make the live talks, they can watch them in their own time. So if you're interested, just drop me an email or Twitter or Facebook, and we'll get you sorted out. So for the recording, thank you very much for watching again on YouTube, and I'll see you again soon.